Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast, where host Dr. Kirby Rosplock speaks with experts on topics relevant to the ultra-high net worth family wealth management space. Please note, the views and information shared are for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or investment advice. Kirby is author of several books including The Complete Family Office Handbook and shares her expertise consulting with families and family offices. Kirby is also the founder of Tamarind Learning, an online wealth education platform that develops practical foundational learning programs for beneficiaries to help them prepare for responsible stewardship of wealth.
Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirby Rosplock. I'm super excited because today we have a longtime friend, a brilliant gentleman, and someone who's really developing cool new thought leadership. So, Lindsay Pope, thank you so much for joining us today on the Tamarind Learning Podcast.
It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Kirby.
Well, Lindsay, you have inspired me because your work is really pushing the boundaries when it comes to purposeful trusteeship. And I don't know how many people really talk about this concept, but you are sort of coming up with leading edge ideas about how to think about control and care for the well-being of the beneficiary. And I just can't wait to sort of dig in and talk more about what inspired you, where this concept came from. But before we go there, you are a thought leader in this area of fiduciary oversight. You focus a lot of your practice on trusteeship, legacy, estate planning, this whole intergenerational wealth conversation. You've spent decades helping trustees. I won't say how old you are, but trustees, beneficiaries, families, and advisors thinking more deeply about the role of their trust, their thoughts on trust and wealth transfer, trustee conduct, the impact that fiduciaries have on these relationships. And so today we are going to be talking about this emerging framework that you and Frank Mullins are working on, this purposeful trusteeship concept, and why it really matters for governance, for the beneficiary's well-being and experience, and really for wealth continuity. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So tell us, you've had this lifetime of work in this fiduciary space, trust and trusteeship. What prompted you to step back and say, hey, we need a new framework for how trustees think and believe?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I didn't start out trying to create a framework.
Okay.
that
Fair
emerged.
enough.
And the process I went through is there was a couple of milestones. One was in a trustee company that I used to work in for a number of years, and I had a trustee standards role, and there weren't many practices documented around how you think and conduct in certain key areas. And that led me to, when I left that firm, to look at best practices, and that led me to the Purposeful Planning Institute. So John A. Warnick has been a significant influence in my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank, who you mentioned earlier, and I started having some conversations when we met at PPI around, a lot of the content at one particular immersion was to do with a lot of advisory, purposeful advisory skills and techniques. And Frank and I were working in the trust space and were saying, well, okay, when you look at the universe of trusts that are out there, it's going to take time for those newly crafted, purposeful, advice-formed trusts to come through. What can we do with the existing ones, and how could we practically implement a more purposeful philosophy, which we both believed in, and that started the process. And it's taken a few years. So some may say I'm a slow learner. It's coming up to 50 years, but I'm at a stage in time of life where you kind of think, you look back and you think about these things. And it's probably the last 10 years in particular, I've spent a lot of time understanding some of the good stuff that's already out there.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of what we'll talk about today is shining a light on ideas of John Warnaker mentioned at a PPI, but also, the authors of The Spirit of the Gift, Jay Hughes and Susan Mazzino and Keith Whitaker, and some of their work, Hartley Goldstone with the Family Trust book, with Keith and Jay Hughes. And there's a lot of good stuff there. The framework was just something that we pulled together, which, as we went through this process, to hold some of those ideas. And we had a couple of ahas on the way through ourselves.
So what do you see traditional trusteeship often missing? And what problem is purposeful trusteeship trying to solve?
The key gap that we found as we went through this process was really the difference between the technical and the relational aspects of trusteeship. And relationships are hard anyway.
Yeah.
And when you've got the complexity of a trustee-beneficiary relationship, where you've separated the ownership and control from the beneficial interests, it's fraught. The trustees are coming to the table with all the power and control. And one of the things we recognize is that unless you actually invest in lifting up to the beneficiaries to a level of knowledge and understanding that you can start to be in conversation. Otherwise, it's just beneficial, going back to traditional, is the beneficiary comes in and says, "Oh, I need this. How much?" says the trustee. Yeah. And then the beneficiary says, and then the trustee, faces this dilemma, yes, no, and then gets on to the next thing on their desk.
Yeah. Well, plus I feel like, right, we're talking about these two roles acting as if they're equal, right? Trustee, beneficiary, but really the trustee has the most knowledge. Typically they've read the trust, they know they have duties, and the beneficiary could be anywhere, right, on that spectrum. And relationally, it's like, it's already unequal, right?
It's absolutely unbalanced at the start. Yeah. The beneficiary's got the control. They hold all the trustee has got the control, all the information. And really and they may be experienced in the field. And the beneficiary, this may be their first time coming to the table and, just trying to understand what's this trust about?
Yeah.
Why did mum or dad leave it this way?
Yeah. And I think that gets to the question that you mentioned when we were talking about this podcast, that many existing trusts are never really activated. What do you mean by that? And why is that such an important insight?
It was thinking, we were looking at the intersection between a trustee and a beneficiary. And you alluded to, the trustee coming to the table, sometimes quite well armed with all the information. And I mentioned, they got the power and control. It almost is a top-down relationship with the trustee on top. Mm-hmm. And the beneficiary comes through this way. I see it from a purposeful perspective, more a side-by-side relationship, where the trustee and the beneficiary are together based on the terms of that trust. Now, the activation piece is when I've reviewed hundreds of thousands of trusts during a close to 50-year career. And sometimes you take over a new trust and you look at it with fresh eyes and you see this possibility. But if a trust, a lot of trustees, it seems to me, are going through the motions. It's more a reactive approach. There's the bare minimum of focus and they're on to the next thing that's required. And really, there's no spirit in the trust. There's nothing there, no energy. And really, activation is thinking from a purposeful perspective. If you're going to take a more generative approach, and what I mean by that is, being generative is thinking about the people involved, the possibility, the purposes of the trust, coming with a positive disposition rather than just a risk focus as a trustee. And thinking about what's possible, all of a sudden you start seeing things through a slightly different lens. So if we think of trust and activation, really, it's how do you inject a dose of generativity and in order to make the trust, come to life.
Yeah.
for the trustee and also the beneficiaries.
Well, maybe you can give us a story from practice where, say, a trust technically worked, it was working, but the beneficiary experience clearly did not match, did not keep up to pace with how the trust was working.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. Where I used to see this was in reviewing trusts that have gone wrong. I worked for a firm that had about 13,000 trusts, agencies, and estates, and things aren't always going to go smoothly. And often I would look and intercept some of those relationships and find out where things have gone wrong and put some corrective steps in. To do that, I remember one in particular that stood out where there was a really capable person who had handed over to another really capable person, but something didn't gel in the relationship. And the person who took it over was well briefed, and there was meetings and everything else, but it just didn't gel.
Yeah.
It was an investment advisor that told me at one stage what he was doing, and it made me realize that people don't always buy trusts as things. The importance of this relationship and how, and so technically it was going really well. Assets were managed, the investments were done, the file was pristine. But the person who had been there, the main beneficiary in this case was a life tenant, didn't feel that things were going her way. And she drifted to get what she wanted from a relationship of trust towards the investment advisor, who really wasn't he was throwing it back, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. So it was a case of resetting that. But that was an example where, I noticed when you have changes of relationship or manager, trust manager or advisor, you've got to be so careful and self-aware as a trustee. If it's not working, maybe someone else needs to step in.
So how, in a sentence, how would you define purposeful trustee?
Well, really, a purposeful trustee is one who chooses to operate from a position where they adopt a generative style of care and beneficiary care that is focused on not only just beneficiary outcomes, but improving trust outcomes. So it's thinking from the delivery and the outputs and the beneficiary experience.
Yeah, I love that. It's feels warm, like a hug, not like formal and cold and, governed, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Another thing I love that you bring up is that we talk about distributions, right? That's one of the main activities that a trustee has to, preside over, discernment over. And you've reframed distribution as beneficiary enhancement. Why is that shift so important?
Well, I need to acknowledge that I didn't reframe it with that term. That's a J. Hughes gift to the community of life enhancement.
You're so good not to take credit for, but you like that concept.
But I've certainly run with it.
Yes. Okay. You run with it. You run with it.
And it's an important thing. So rather than thinking what he's taught us is if when we use a different lens, a lens of enhancement, we think differently about the impact of, the trust on the life of the beneficiary. And it may lead us to different sorts of decisions than we would have made, in a traditional sense. It's just not about receiving a request and paying out money. It's thinking more laterally and working with the beneficiary. And that's really hard to do as a trustee if you don't know what their goals are and how they match the trusts. So thoughtful enhancement is one of the strategies we have run with for how we think about distributions. But please, yes,
I'm going to let you own it. And even though Jay may have conceived it, you embrace it. And I like it. I mean, I like beneficiary enhancement because it speaks to the well-being, not just about like the cash outlay.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's right. Trusts are for the benefit of the beneficiary. Ultimately, they may not hold legal title, but they're supposed to impart something, a gift that's going to make them better.
Yes.
And I think one thing I'd love to jump into is, why would you argue that if you have a smarter, better beneficiary, it's better for the trustee? Because the old myth, I think, that we live behind is keep the beneficiary in the dark. Don't tell them too much. Let them only know just in time when maybe they get to an age of majority and get a distribution. Why do you think that logic is so flawed, and why having an informed, educated, prepared beneficiary can make a trustee's job much more effective and probably fulfilling, right?
I'll give you a real life example dealing with at the moment, where mum and dad created a trust. There's a family business associated with it, and mum, as the last survivor of mum and dad, has died. Now, all the assets are held in trust, and the next generation of beneficiaries have come to the table and say, well, how do things work? And they're starting to get pushback. The traditional approach isn't working. They haven't been embraced. There's a distance between the trustee and the beneficiary. They're quite happy to keep it that way. The trustees haven't recognised that there are new faces at the table that need to be considered and actually thought about. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's I know I've drifted, but it's just thinking as a trustee, what's happening, managing milestones that when you're looking forward, thinking about what's coming up. Too much of the traditional trusteeship is the here and now. Just thinking about, and that reactive approach, sometimes a bare minimum.
Yeah. I want to shift gears. Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I like that this intentional sort of investment into enriching their competence and confidence really helps you be a better, effective communicator, helps you be positioned to build trust, not just the trust, right?
And that's where, if you've got that risk as a trustee, if you keep the beneficiaries centered and help understand, and really that's part of your trustee role of accountability to beneficiaries. And a lot of trustees are reluctant to do that. But if you do that and you do it in a way that they feel there's a productive relationship between them and their trustee, that's going to mean happy beneficiaries. It's going to be more happier trustees, and that's got to reduce the potential risk. So while I'm based here in New Zealand, for example, how trustees come to the table in a global sense is exactly the same. Yeah. You've got different laws and stuff like that, but really it's it's the same sort of thinking that's required, no matter where you live or act from.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to show some of the incredible frameworks that you and Frank have been putting together. And I'd love to show this trusteeship continuum, because I think it's really cool. So I'm just going to pull it up here. Yeah.
Thanks,
I know.
Kirby.
It's not very sophisticated when I say that, but showing your continuum, on one side, you have this prescriptive trusteeship. On the other side, you have this purposeful trusteeship. Walk us through this spectrum.
Well, really, when you look at this, if you go back to what we mentioned at the start, that trustees enter this relationship from a position of power and control. They can make all the decisions, and they also have all the information. In many ways, those trusts where the trustee, they arrive in the relationship and see themselves on top and the beneficiaries on the bottom, and they don't drift from there at all. It's probably the more prescriptive is just people going through, the job in a technical way, thinking about, risk. Often if they come from risk, it's all focused on at one end of that continuum on trustee authority. If we were to adopt a more purposeful tone as a trustee, what the first part is recognizing how do you want to be in relationship with your beneficiary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Frank and I are advocating a more side-by-side relationship rather than top-down. So a prescriptive trustee, that's the Oliver Twist type trustee, where you've got to go there and ask for some more and put your hand out or a cap out or the bowl out. On the other side, at the furthest extreme of purposeful trusteeship, is that it's a much more democratic approach. The trustee sees the context of the trust as a gift and operates from that perspective. It's more of thinking about what does the beneficiary care going to look like in the trustee's approach? How might they involve the beneficiaries in decisions which affect them? What information may they give? They may give more information out on the basis to sort of test the beneficiary's way of using it responsibly. So it doesn't mean lurching from one end of the continuum to another. It's the purpose of the continuum is a place just to think from as a trustee. Where am I operating at the moment? Am I a 2 on that continuum, or more a 6 or a 7? Where do I want to be in the style of trusteeship that I'm going to adopt? Yeah. Am I comfortable in letting go a little, bit of control or information in order to form something more productive? By giving the beneficiary some agency, they may feel better about this really complex relationship that we've been, or arranged marriage that we've been put in. So, yeah, that's the idea with the continuum. It's really to look from and think from where you may be at any particular time. A beneficiary can also use it to say, what sort of trustee have I got? Maybe they could have a conversation. And, we've talked about preparing some sort of assessment for beneficiaries or trustees to become more aware of their style of trusteeship.
I love that.
Yeah, so it's thinking from it. Just one other point I'd make there, Kirby, is that I absolutely believe it doesn't matter whether you're a corporate trustee or acting personally in the role as a trustee. You can choose how you come to the table. We've got quite a lot of discretion in the style of trusteeship that we adopt, irrespective of what the governing terms of a trust are. Mm-hmm. So really using that discretion to think about how do we want to be when we sit at the trustee table and what's important. So moving from a culture of beneficiary control through to, beneficiary care, that was quite a key observation for us. And Jay Hughes in particular, in some conversations with him, led us to that, when we're describing the tension that exists or the culture that exists, helping us label that it was a cultural issue. That we've got in trust. All trusts have this culture. Yeah. They have it can be negative, positive, or whatever. Yeah.
I do love expanding on this conversation because when I think about a G1 or a founder setting up trusts, they in their headset have a whole spectrum of thinking of like why they're doing this, to what end. And, for some, truth be told, it is control. They want to control where that wealth is going, who's going to have access to it, designating, a trustee to make sure they abide by the terms of the trust and follow out, the wishes of the grantor. So there is already embedded a lot of like control levers, right? Just embedded in the structure itself. But I love that the trustee continuum actually empowers the trustee to make a choice to act purposeful, make a decision of like, am I caring for that beneficiary or am I just following out the legal duties and responsibilities as trustee? And there is a choice for the trustee how they want to show up. And I think that's kind of where you're getting too about the behaviors that a purposeful trustee might hold versus a prescriptive one. Maybe you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I've always thought that trustee diligence is at the intersection of, conduct and mindset. So, and if you're thinking about an axis with those lines in there, at one end down the lower quarter would be around the prescriptive side, the purposeful side at the other side. But it's not just how you behave at the table, it's how you think. And really that discretion that we've got as to how we turn up, for me, is really what this model is trying to articulate, or help people see that there are other possibilities, especially if as a trustee you're finding things aren't clicking. You can then look back on yourself to say, well, what options have I got?
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to pause on the graphic because I actually want to go to some other areas that you've expanded on and started to more, fill out around purposeful trusteeship. And that's this emotional legacy, financial legacy, and beneficiary experience. Maybe you can sort of talk through this slide around purposeful trusteeship and managing these two legacies.
Thanks, Kirby. When Frank and I started looking into this area and looking at what information is around, one of John A. Warnick's observations it had never occurred to me in sort of 45 years of trusteeship that there are two legacies that beneficiaries receive. One is the financial legacy, what they receive as just being a beneficiary within a trust. The emotional legacy is how they feel about things. And when I started thinking about a lot of situations and revisiting them where trusts had gone off the rails, often it was around that emotional legacy. And the question then came back to, well, what impacts that? And the conclusion we came to was the beneficiary experience. And if you flick on to the next slide there, Kirby, we added in the trustee and the beneficiary to the situation we're describing, and Jay helped us put that, that there is this trust culture, and really helped us to understand that all structures have a culture. And if we're going to be on the more purposeful end of trusteeship and cultivating a culture of care, it forced us to think about what sort of things as trustees do we need to be doing and thinking about, and how we interact with the beneficiaries. So the culture exists in every trust. And this is where it can be negative, pretty neutral, or it can be really positive. So going back to the point about activating a trust, when people feel good about the trust, both the trustee and the beneficiary, and it's been activated through a positive culture, and the beneficiary may feel, I'm quite happy being involved. That's where this really lights and ignites. And really the first step is the trustees thinking about, how can I infuse, myself into this culture in a way that produces those sorts of outcomes that impact on the beneficiary experience. And
you've kind of taken this in an even broader, deeper way. And I want to ask permission if I can continue going down to the next sort of evolution of this, or if you want to spend a little bit more time here.
No, please. We'll go on.
Okay. So you've actually spelled this out into domains, these 6 domains. And this is, to me, this is super interesting, super powerful. Talk us through some of these different domains, what they mean to you, and why you think they're so relevant to this purposeful trusteeship concept.
When Frank and I started digging in, and you'll see that there, whatever the structure is, it produces some sort of outcome, and that's really from the culture. And so we thought, right, if we're going to be more purposeful and operate from that end of the trustee continuum, really the beneficiary experience has to be front and center. And that's an output of the culture that's created. And really beefs up the qualitative aspects of trusteeship that sometimes don't get all the attention they deserve. As trustees, a lot of time we default to the investment and administrative functions, and we're mindful of what the governing terms are. And when we're under the pump, sometimes the things that fall off are the things that the relational aspects. And if you get a tough beneficiary, let's face it, sometimes it's pretty hard to work with them. It can consume a lot of time. But the three top ones of relational, cultural, and intentional really are all, that's something that the more qualitative elements of trusteeship, and they balance nicely. So if you think about it from a financial sense, that's around about the care of the capital.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about the structure as a trustee, you're looking there to find out what are those governing terms and what signals are sent as to how I should be thinking about this trust from maybe the trust creator. And you've got the relationship. And those three down that column are the three certainties associated with trust to be valid. You need beneficiaries, you need trust property, and you need some sort of governing terms or intention for a trust to be created. What was missing, if we took the last slide that talked about the emotional legacy not being there, if you flick back one there.
Oops, sorry.
Yep. That cultural piece really is around the care of the beneficiary. And if with the care of the beneficiary, that nicely offsets the care for the capital. So it's thinking about assets, but also people who have to live in these systems. So the 6 domains were just a nice way for us to think from. It's a place to review a trust from. And it's a place that, we can give designated focus, and capture the good ideas that were out there already. And they fitted nicely into these boxes. If you go to the next slide, that's then, well, what is purposeful trusteeship? How does that fit with those 6 domains? Well, the domains are the same, but really around the 3 qualitative ones, relational, cultural, and intentional, a purposeful trustee is focusing more on those, and you'll see they're more outcome focused. How do you get engaged beneficiaries? What's required to build a relationship, a trust there? Intentionally coming to the table with this philosophy and thinking in a generative way, looking at the trust and thinking, recognizing that there is a gift associated with this trust. And even though it may not be expressed in that way, or it does have a life of its own. And the authors of The Spirit of the Gift taught us that, with a trust, there's a couple of parts. There's the intentions of the trust creator, if they have been expressed, but there's also the life of its own that a trust has. And it's thinking about how do we capture that spirit and infuse it into the trust. And if as a trustee we're thinking from that perspective that this truly is a gift for the beneficiaries, it does help frame that whole purposeful dynamic.
I love that. I love that.
So that gives us, the 5 areas there of focus, which are mainly in the top 4 domains, centered on the beneficiary experience. And when you think from that perspective, all of a sudden, new possibilities arise. So
what happens if you're not great in one of these, like, sort of 6 domain areas? Do we see certain, and is there one really, obviously, if you don't follow the terms, that could be really bad, like breach of fiduciary duty. But what do you think is one of the areas that you think strays away from purposeful trusteeship if you're missing a domain?
Yeah. Well, if you come to the table as a trustee, you've made a decision. Once you're in and in the saddle, so to speak, you've got to start riding that horse. And you could outsource the 2 bottom domains, the administrative investment functions, but you really can't outsource the relational side of things. Yeah. And so how that relationship is between trustees and beneficiaries is founded, and the culture that's produced, really that is the key. And if there is a weakness, it's starting to think, well, if I was managing an existing trust, what sort of culture exists with this between myself as the trustee and my co-trustees, if there are co-trustees, and how we collectively run the trust for the benefit of the beneficiaries? What sort of relationship exists between us as trustees and those beneficiaries? What do we want to have it? And that's where, if there was an area of weakness, that would be one that, how do you strengthen and lift up to a similar way that's already there, the qualitative aspects to equal the quantitative that are generally run pretty well a lot of the time.
Yeah. I would love to jump into some scenarios. How do you feel about that?
I'm good to jump. Thanks, Kirby. Yes.
Okay. So let's just think about this concept a little bit in practice. Let me give you a scenario. A trust has been in place for 20 years. The trustees are technically compliant, but beneficiaries feel shut out, underinformed, and mistrusted. What does a purposeful trustee do first?
I think the first pass would be operating down those 3 different slides of understanding the relationship dynamics, the terms of the trust, and the assets that they're responsible for. So what's sort of possible. But I think a lot of it is, you're looking at it with fresh eyes through this new lens. Mm-hmm. And if it's been running 20 years, this gives you opportunities for new conversations. So that's, to me, is what is the nature of the conversations that are possible and are required, and how would you start that? And I think this, thinking leads you a particular way. It won't be for everyone, but it embraces what's already there, but adds to it, and being able to say, well, what new conversations may be needed as a purposeful trustee to reset things, think about how things can be done. How can you take a more life enhancement approach with distributions rather than just paying monthly remittances or sending out deposits to bank statements?
And I can imagine if a beneficiary doesn't feel seen, maybe feels undervalued, doesn't feel as a priority to a trustee, even the act of saying, let's do a little bit of a postmortem on some of our communication. Let's maybe I need to know more about what's important to you, or what you're passionate about, or what your hopes and dreams are. Because I think sometimes we look at what you're not doing and why I've said no in the past, and never actually ask a beneficiary what is it that you want to achieve in your life, and what part, if this trust could help support you in a productive, generative, expansive capacity. That's what I'm hearing you say, that purposeful trusteeship can really change the dialogue and make it feel much more about I'm your partner. I'm here to work with you. I'm not here to be a gatekeeper, a guardrail, a moat from your capital.
Yeah, sometimes that's how we see it. We almost, as trustees, look back, and it's how we hold on to the trust creator and, what their wishes were, which could have been well-intentioned or not. If they set something up with, for tax reasons, that's not going to be really igniting for the beneficiary,
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right about the conversation. So some conversation areas in the cultural space could be how, I think I mentioned it earlier, how well aligned are our goals in the trust with those of the beneficiaries' goals in life, which is what you are alluding to. Are they aligned? Do we understand what their hopes and intentions are in life? What stage of life are they at? If we did choose to provide the beneficiary with a bit more agency, how might we do that to empower them? It could be with trusting them with more information and seeing how they use it, and is it, used responsibly. It could be sitting with them and making decisions that affect them. And so that, yes, at the end of the day, as a trustee, I have the control and power, but if I'm doing it with my beneficiaries, especially on tough, gritty decisions, that's actually kind of cool. It's also thinking ahead as to what's coming up and what what might be the situation in 10 years. I'll give you an example. A beneficiary who was 15, where the trustees were saying, this beneficiary receives a significant inheritance through the trust when they're 25. And we started having a conversation that's saying, what signals do we need to start sending? When they're 18 here in New Zealand, they're entitled to receive, they're an adult, they're entitled to all the trust information. How might they use it? What conversations do we need to have as trustees before we have conversations with the beneficiary? And thinking at 25, what would be a really good outcome for that? And they started thinking and having a plan. Quite different conversations.
Totally different. And I love that. I want to jump to one other scenario before I pepper you with a few more questions. Let's talk about a scenario where there's a family business held in trust. One trustee also deeply embedded in the operating company. How do conflicts and emotional legacies start to compound in that kind of situation?
The compounding I would see would be when there starts becoming a blurring of roles and responsibilities. And for a beneficiary or a trustee sometimes, it's understanding what hat's being worn. But particularly from a beneficiary, if they're interacting with these people who are, or a trustee that's also embedded in the family business, and they're also the trustee decision maker, what hat are they wearing? Are all the roles, which often happens in some families, merged together? The management, the director type roles, the family roles, and the trustee role. And where tension starts getting wound into that sort of system is that when the beneficiary starts second-guessing motives. And if there isn't the clarity or the transparency around the decisions, or if there's potential conflict. So an example of dealing with recently was one where they were adopting an absolute growth strategy within the business. There were no distributions coming out to the trust. The trustee was also the managing director. So, and you had to start questioning, well, why are they doing it that way? Is this the stage and time of life that the settlers or grantors of the trust, wanted family members to be enjoying it? The problem we had was that we just couldn't even get into the conversation. Wow. So it can be a struggle, but it's generally the roles and hey, family trustees aren't always trained. You've got some wonderful resources for beneficiaries and trustees in Tamarin, and it's how do we, again, lift knowledge up just to be in conversation, to think about things they might not be thinking about.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, so many family members may be asked to step up into a fiduciary capacity, and they think they're being honored, and this is a wonderful responsibility, not really knowing, like, wow, there's a lot of liability, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of information I really need to know. And then we're leveling up to purposeful trusteeship. So we're talking like the, super trustee. And, I think even to be purposeful requires you to know like the foundation of duties, responsibilities, all the various duties of care, prudence, everything. And I think it's really valuable that you've elevated with this framework, the intentionality, because most of the fiduciary guidance out there is just like to check the box that you are fulfilling your responsibilities. But it doesn't necessarily go to this level around having a duty of care and a duty to really think about the well-being of that beneficiary.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree entirely. Thank you, Kirby.
So do you want to jump to a lightning round, or do you want me to ask you any more questions around purposeful trusteeship or decision-making or anything?
Lightning sounds good.
Lightning
I think you said
is
it was
fun.
going to be short.
It's going to be short. These are just like 1 or 2 sentence answers. Don't think about it. Whatever comes to mind. Okay. One word that defines a great trustee.
Caring.
Caring. Beneficiary agency. Is it a risk or an opportunity?
I think it would be, from my side, you'd see it as an opportunity. Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
I love it. Biggest trustee blind spot.
Investing in the trustee beneficiary relationship. Yeah, it's certainly where I've come to. Just the complexity of it and knowing that it takes time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Last one. Finish this sentence. A purposeful trustee always.
A purposeful trustee always thinks about the beneficiary experience. Yeah, that certainly is a theme. Yeah.
Oh, wow, Lindsay, you are just a fountain of inspiration and creativity and innovation. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your sharing. I mean, if listeners remember just one thing from this conversation, what do you want it to be about purposeful trusteeship?
That there is a choice. You know, you can be quite intentional as to how you turn up. And sometimes when you start this journey of purposefulness, you're not always going to get it right, but there is a choice and there are resources being developed that will help guide you. And yeah, it's taking small steps in the right direction, but to know what it is that's possible. And I encourage people to head that way or join the conversation.
Excellent. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us today on the Tamarind Learning Podcast. You have really inspired me. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe. You know, we want to get this out. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon. You can find us on YouTube as well. So please like, share, and follow us. And you can always find out more about Lindsay at his website, right?
Yes, it's www.lindsaypope.com.
Fantastic. And we'll be posting this. So we can't wait for you to follow Lindsay, learn more about his work and this framework that's coming out. And we're going to be working on a cool assessment with it. So again, so grateful to you. Such an inspiration, such a thought leader in this fiduciary space. And thank you. Thank you for being here with me today.
Excellent.
Thanks for listening to this Tamarind Learning Podcast featuring Lindsay Pope. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Continue your learning with the following courses: Introduction to Trusts, Trustee Responsibilities, Trustee Types, and Sourcing a Trustee. Explore the responsibilities and duties underlying effective trusteeship, evaluate different trustee structures, and learn how trustees can better serve beneficiaries. It's the practical foundation for putting purposeful trusteeship into action. If you enjoyed this episode, listen to Prevent Trust Disputes Before They Happen, featuring Megan Tepes. Tune in next month for a brand new Tamarind Learning Podcast.